How? I mean, it's going to be counterintuitive, but it's almost like act first and think later. It's like if you're thinking about coming, just come. Give yourself, like the tourist visa is what, like 3 months? Just come for 3 months. I mean, as a student, it may be a different ballgame because like you may not have the means, but like as an entrepreneur, you can build from anywhere. There's almost like a downside into preparing it too much because who are you gonna talk to? Like other French people that live in the Bay Area.
Do you think there's still opportunity? Do you think the American dream is alive today?
I think so. And there's examples, like every day of entrepreneurs that will come and make it. You can create a company within like an hour, even less online. You don't need to fill out, like an endless number of paperwork in order to hire someone, or you can even start as a contractor. To let someone go, it's also super easy, whereas in France it's like nearly impossible. So I think to succeed, it's easier.
Hello, our guest today follow the path that many ambitious young French professionals dream about, but few actually take. Henri Deshays built a strong foundation in France, studying at Paris Dauphine and Sciences Po, and then spent 5 years working in finance in Paris. But in 2008, he decided to make a bet on himself and pursue an MBA at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Over the next 17 years in the Bay Area, Henri founded a startup in the fashion industry, helped to launch StartX, which is one of Stanford's flagship startup accelerator, and became a Kauffman Fellow. For the past 9 years, he's been a partner at Newfund, which is a Franco-American venture capital fund backing early stage founders on both sides of the Atlantic. And what makes Henri's story particularly compelling for us today is that it's a story with a twist ending, where after nearly 2 decades of building a life, a career, and a family in the Bay Area, Henri is moving back to France this summer. So today we get a chance to hear the story of not just someone who made it in America, but the reflection of someone who's chosen to close that chapter and to move back home. Henri, welcome to Beyond Borders.
Thanks a lot for having me. I feel nostalgic now. And I'm still here. I'm still in the US.
You're still here. You're still here for now. So enjoy the time you have left here. Jumping right in. So you have a very strong foundation in France. You went to some of the top schools. You spent, years working there in finance. What made you take a leap and come to Stanford and come to the US?
Come to the US, I think was the first role. I realized that my background was very, very French. As you said, right, I studied in France. First job was there. The bit of English that I knew was, like I was working for a Japanese corporation, so like speaking English with Japanese people, which I realized when I came to Stanford, that doesn't really mean that I was speaking English. So role number one was like, okay, I wanted to see what was out there, do an MBA, and I applied to 5 of them. 2 said yes, and when I came to visit, it was in February. One was on the East Coast. Actually, no, 3. Sorry. So there was like Wharton, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Stanford. And I started with Wharton. It was really, really cold. Chicago almost lost a year. Sorry. And then I ended up at Stanford in February. People were wearing flip-flops and shorts. I was like, this is a nice place. At the time, it was not that well known. Like it was known as an engineering school, but for European, not so much as an MBA because it was far away. So like the default was more on the East Coast. But my girlfriend at the time was working in robotics, and she made it clear that it was Stanford or I would go by myself. So I had 2 very competing reasons to come.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's hard to beat the weather and the girlfriend's preference. So when you moved here, you were right into the deep end. There's a big difference, I think, in the relationship between risk and failure in France and the US. And I think in your career, that shift also was marked. Did you feel that difference and that cultural gap immediately when you moved here, or how did that come about?
It was pretty quick. First, listening to the stories of like other, like of classmates, I'd say like a good third of them either had a business on the side or had an entrepreneurial story. I was like, wow, that's super impressive. And I had a bit of an entrepreneurial journey, although I don't know if it would be called entrepreneur, but like I co-founded a European fashion brand back in France, and was complaining a lot to a bunch of classmates about how hard it was to like sell online and like make a name for ourselves. and they kindly reminded me that, like, okay, no more complaining. We understand that you're French, but you know that you're in the Bay Area right now. It looks like you know the industry very well. You understand the problem, and sounds like you may have a solution for that. Why don't you try to create a startup? And that's actually a friend, classmate. She went a little beyond that. It's like, and we're gonna do it together. So that was like during the summer of my second year, and that was like the early innings of Modewalk, which we co-founded back when I was in school, and she had just graduated. And would I have done that in France? Uh, I don't know. Well, actually, an interesting story. So when we went out to go and raise our first round of equity, the dream I had, because the whole idea of Modo, like, well, we're going to create a new environment to discover um, famous brands, sorry, high-end brands, but not that famous. Hopefully, make them famous. We wanted to have investors from the Bay Area for the tech side, and from France for, like, all like the fashion and luxury network. Investors in the Bay Area were spending a lot of time explaining us, what were potentially like the weak points of the idea that we had, and kind of like brainstorming on like how we could solve it, connecting us with other people that they knew that were potentially in the field. France, they spend the same energy, more like trying to convince us why it would not work. So bear in mind, there was also like, different mindset. It was 2010. I'm sure a lot of things have changed since, but like you could really see a different mindset of like risk appetite. Like they were here seeing the challenge and why it was worthwhile potentially, trying to nail. In France, they were like seeing the challenge and why it would be hard and very difficult to succeed.
Hmm. Yeah, different perspectives. Did you end up getting funding from both French and American investors in the end?
95% US investors. The only investor that, well, investor. So we had one angel investor that was like amazingly helpful. His name is Vincent Bastien. He used to be the CEO of Louis Vuitton, and he helped us a ton in Europe. All the others ended up not coming to the company at that round and at the next one.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, we see it's reflected, I guess, in how much funding goes to France and the US, and how much they back startups. It's like the perspective influences the capital decisions, I guess, as well.
I hope it changed. Well, and I see it has changed. Like Newfund is an example, but like the motto of Newfund had to evolve. Before it was like we're gonna back ideas and entrepreneurs that others, like don't back because it sounds crazy, it's too risky, so forth. Uh, Now you do have like a fairly strong financing ecosystem in Europe in general and in France in particular. So we're not there yet, right? Like there's a reason, as you said, why I guess like the venture industry maybe like 20 or 30x larger in the US than it is in France, but we came a long way. When I left, there was barely one accelerator anywhere. Now, like every arrondissement in Paris will have its own accelerator.
Of course, yeah, and stuff and all, there's a lot more visibility and momentum, I guess, in the French ecosystem. Um, so I want to loop back to New later and what you're doing there, but I want to touch a bit on your kind of personal adaptation, cultural adaptation, not just professional. So beyond just like the language and speaking English, how much of a culture shock was it to come here? How long did it take you to adapt and to fit in?
In a way, I think I'm still adapting, but the culture shock. Uh, I would say like maybe like the first 6 months were a hell of a shock. Uh, Here's the best thing that happened to me. So when I joined Stanford, out of I think there was like 360 or 370, like students, I was the only Frenchman. And what was great is that it didn't give me the possibility or the luxury to kind of like recreate my little village of like other French people. I had to adapt much faster, and I mean clearly there's like folks with culture you're going to feel much closer from like folks from like Germany, Israel. Mexico, yeah, and then Europeans, naturally, like Italians and so forth, where, like we even like after a few months created what we called a bitching dinner. So we were like getting together and just like it was like our moment to complain, right? It's like we were tired of like everyone saying, "Oh, this is wonderful, this is fascinating, this is so great." It's like, nope, we're gonna leave all that at the door and we're gonna just let our cynical side rise and shine. It was a fun one. Uh, but I think it was like 6 months potentially like to break, like the habits I used to have, and then another six to like learn new ones. With the Bay Area having its own culture in a way, if you look around, like it's almost rarer to have someone who's been, like born and raised in the US, like as an entrepreneur or classmate, as someone who like came from somewhere. Uh, so there is like a common culture of like the ambition, willing to like solve problems, willing to innovate. And clearly it was not, like the culture or the mold I was coming from. And it's the one I got to learn and really came to embrace.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love the bitching dinners. I might have to start that
Right?
as well. Yeah, that's great. But yeah, I agree. Like California, particularly Bay Area. I live in LA too. I think it's similar. It just attracts people from everywhere, and there's not so many people born, raised, and lived their whole life and stayed there. So it's a kind of cosmopolitan mix of people across the U.S. and the world, which may not be, as the case in a lot of other places in the U.S. itself either. Um, so you dove right in. You got to Stanford. You started a startup. You also got involved with StartX at kind of the inception of it as a VP of strategic initiatives. I was curious about that experience and kind of what it taught you about building something from nothing and just taking a risk to create something new.
Yeah, the VP of Strategic Initiative is like, I think because we had to figure out a title the second time in. The the first time is, so it was in 2010 when we were still like students. All of us kind of like want to be entrepreneurs. Like we had an idea of what we wanted to do, and at the time, uh, there wasn't a lot of organizations within Stanford like helping entrepreneurship. There was one class where you could like have a specific project that was tied to entrepreneur. There was a student organization, and it's from a student organization called like Stanford Student Enterprise, where we basically got together and like, wouldn't it be cool to create a program where we could find mentors that went to Stanford, potentially angel investors. We will help each other out, and um, and by the way, credit due to Cameron Talmine, who's like, I would say like the real founder and the real CEO, because he saw it through during his 4 years at Stanford and afterwards. Together we created what was called the SSE Labs. And after one session, Stanford came to us and didn't really like what we were doing. At that time, students were there to study, not to play with companies. So they invited us to do it elsewhere. And that's when we created StartX as a independent organization, nonprofit. The idea was like by and for entrepreneurs to kind of like help create a community of founders. And we actually went, so I helped maybe like the first 9, 12 months. Then I told Cam that I couldn't continue to spend as much time because of my startup. That went through StartX a few months later. And when I sold the company after a year of rest and vest, I came back to StartX, which had changed a lot at that time. We had a fund with, because Stanford now realized that we were, I think, more helpful for the ecosystem. So they were financing a venture fund that was affiliated with StartX. The team grew. We had our own space. Before I remember we were squatting we had a half a floor in the AOL building, for anyone who remembers AOL. So yeah, it's quite a journey, and StartX is still around. Well, that's where you and I met. It's quite an outstanding, like community of founders. So I hope it's gonna continue to grow and hopefully beyond the Bay Area.
Yeah, I love StartX. Obviously, it was my introduction to the Bay Area and the startup ecosystem here and to you. So always grateful to what they do and what they've done. I love that you had a part in building the program that you went through yourself, with your startup. So kind of going full circle immediately. And I always found it funny. I found it funny how Stanford is known as the entrepreneurship school, but there is some resistance of like pushing students to build companies. There's a bit of a tension there, but it's great they supported StartX and they support so many programs today.
Yeah, it's weird because what they were worried about, and I think they still are, is basically like students just like quitting school to build their startup. So since then they created more programs within the school, but the whole philosophy they had back then was like building a startup is hard. So let's show them that it's hard, and it was almost like the programs that were there to help were that helpful. I remember they had like an internship program where startups could get students at like a lower rate than for a regular internship. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. And let's find a few, like MBAs that could intern at Modewalk, up to realize that, yeah, you could do that, but you had the company needed to be more than 2 years old. They need to be financed more than $5 million. So I was like, that's not a startup anymore. Or at least that's a startup at another stage. And they changed a bunch because they want to be known for the campus where you can build companies. And there is still, like hundreds of companies that are being built between like professors and students. That's actually, oddly enough, more accepted. At StartX, like 20% of the companies will have a professor as a co-founder. So it's still it's still night and day compared to like any other campus in the US or in France. They're promoting it more and more.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's just different imperatives. They want you to finish your diploma and you want to build a company. You can't necessarily do both, but yeah.
Yes, sir.
So jumping to Newfund and a bit what you're doing there, you're kind of bridging the gap between French and American ecosystems, investing, as a fund, not yourself, but investing both in Europe and France and in the US. Do you see core differences between between French founders and American founders, or is there not so much difference in the end?
There is, there are many, but like I'm trying to figure out if I can summarize it in a few words. I think the US founders will ask for forgiveness, and not permission. That's one thing that European founders have. The second is like the European founders will tend to like launch it once it's great and perfect. US founders, or at least US founders that are in the US, like they will say, no. First, I need to be able to pitch it. And then if, it replies, if there's a favorable reply, then I will build it. So they do it kind of like the other way around. Sometimes even, like a little too much. But there will be a more aggressive, in a good sense of the word, mindset here in the US.
Do you see? I think Americans in general are great storytellers and great at selling and marketing. And also, I don't know if it's more ambitious or more boisterous or something, but like asking for more, selling a bigger vision. Do you see a big difference between French and American in that sense as well?
There is, where I think that the fear of failure isn't as strong here in the US. And so, if I try it, I may as well, like try to hit it big. Like trying to preserve for the downside is much less present in the US, or like in the Bay Area in particular. And by nature, the ambition, like the US don't want to be the best country of North America, right? Or even the best country of the American continent. Want to be like the kind of like the shining light of the world, like like the best in everything. And that rises. A lot of like French entrepreneurs, they want to have a successful company, maybe lead the French market. And often that's actually the danger and the mistake. It's like, well, once you've made it in France, good luck trying to change that larger organization and adapt it to another culture that is the US. Because at the end of the day, like France is equal to what? Like California, that's about it. There's like 49 other states. So there is for sure not the same ambition, although I've seen it changed as well.
Good. I hope it is changing. Yeah, I hope it is. Yeah, yeah. Great. So I want to switch a bit more to personal aspect. And you've been here 17 years. Um, your daughter was born here, so she's American. Uh, how do you feel about your own identity? Do you feel American, French, mixed? How do you think about that today?
Hmm. So I'm also a US citizen for like 2 years now.
Right. Congrats. No easy path to get there, I know.
Uh, it's funny. So it's much harder to get visas initially than it is after a certain amount of time to become a US citizen. Like it literally, like the 10 questions they're gonna ask you is like, tell me three names of a president, like who's your senator and what, one country that borders California or something like that. No, it was, no, sorry, it's one state that borders Mexico. Uh, yeah, the visas initially are much harder to get, and I mean with Trump, it's a whole different level of BS, but that's another story. How do I feel? Um, Often I feel American in France and French in America. So there is like this little bit of like you got you got a butt cheek in every country. Um, at the same time, I feel close to both countries. Like I can see my reaction sometimes in the news when like something is attacking France, or I can also see my reaction 2 days ago when PSG won the final, and wait until there's the World Cup and France is playing. Uh, at the same time, there's like a lot of like American values that like I've embraced. The entrepreneurship being one, like the freedom of speech being another. Some that I will never really fathom, and then I won't be able to integrate, like the right to bear arms or like other different things. So at the end, I'm trying to get like the best of both worlds. And it's going to be interesting, coming back to France to see like how I'll be able to readapt. Some friends are saying like that it's going to be a little difficult to move from a country where like everything is possible to a country where culturally they actually make it hard. Like it's almost like a social currency to tell you that it's not possible, right? Like that creates like a conversation, negotiation. It's like you, there's no there's no fluid in the system by design. So we'll see.
I always think the first reaction, as a French person, is to say no to anything, and then maybe you change your mind. But initially, is like no, and then you think about it. In
Yeah.
the U.S., it's more like, oh yeah, great, let's do that, or let's like, yeah. So I see that as well.
There's very few countries where in the language, you have a double negative to say something positive. So in French, like c'est pas mal, it's not bad. It's not something you will hear in the US. I think like France has that, Bulgaria has that, and maybe a couple more. So yeah, but that's also what makes the charm of the country. That's what makes business more difficult.
Yeah. So I guess the ultimate test is if the U.S. and France are fighting each other in the World Cup, who are you going to root for?
Ha, shit. Because it's not the ultimate test. I usually root for
Okay.
for the underdog, and that one is like the US would be a clear underdog. At the Olympics last time, the US were playing France, and I was like just like France all the way. So I think I will still be for France because my daughter will celebrate France. She says that she loves everything about the US, but for soccer, it's France.
That makes sense, though. I agree.
Well, it's the other way around. She wants to support the ones who's most likely to win.
Oh, okay. So I want to talk a bit about the American dream as a kind of mythological thing that we all heard of or came here for. That anyone can make it here. That it's a meritocracy. You can reinvent yourself. As someone who's lived it and came here maybe to live it, do you think it's still a thing? Do you think there's still opportunity? Do you think the American dream is alive today?
I think so. I do believe that in the US, if you, like have a unique insight. If you work harder, you can really make it. And there's examples, like every day, of entrepreneurs that will come and make it. Today is with technology, of course, but like there's been, a lot of like other examples. Like just think about like Chobani. Like there's not so much like we're talking about like Greek yogurts, Turkish entrepreneurs that, like hadn't made it early before, if I remember correctly, and in his 40s, it became this huge industry. It's not going to be easy peasy, but again, like the economic system, at least for companies, is built to give the entrepreneur a shot. You can create a company within like an hour, even less online. You don't need to fill out, like an endless number of paperwork in order to hire someone, or you can even start as a contractor. To let someone go, it's also super easy, whereas in France it's like nearly impossible. So I think to succeed, it's easier. Now there are also some, like inner pressure within the US where I think to live comfortably, potentially it's harder. Where because that system to make money, has been established, there's also a lot more leeway to everything that is essential for life in the US is going to be expensive, whereas everything that is essential for life in Europe is going to be subsidized. Healthcare, education, even just getting a cell phone. Here you need it, therefore it's going to be there's less regulation and it's free for all. So it's potentially like socially and economically more dangerous, even though it is also more attractive. Yeah, it is the Far West.
Yeah.
Some way.
Yeah, I see it as if you compare it to France. France has a bit of a floor of how low you can go, and you'll have social support, and you'll be okay. But there's also a bit of a ceiling of how high and how much you can get and how far you can go, as opposed to the US. There's kind of no limits to the bottom or the top. There's a lot more
exactly
variance and possibility, but more risk.
The rewards are very different, right? Like if you start making money in France, like the reward is going to get taxed more, right? So eventually, like, except if you manage to do it through a company and then you start to go outside of France, like there is no incentive in France to, like earn, at least from your work, more than $500,000 a year. It's pointless because like 75% of it is going to go to taxes and so forth. Whereas here, like you've got those different layers, there's always incentive to try to get more. So it is a very different mindset and the way the whole system has been built.
So do you think, talk about the American dream and entrepreneurship in particular, do you think immigrants and the experience of immigrants that they have coming here gives them an edge as entrepreneurs? Or is that just kind of a nice notion we tell ourselves?
It could give them an edge because like they come with a different viewpoint. They come in usually hungrier. They come with a chip on their shoulder. They have something to prove, and so I would assume that the energy that they're going to spend is going to be stronger. Now the one thing they won't have just yet is a network, but again, like there have been like some pre-established networks built, to help founders. StartX is one. Yet you have to be affiliated with Stanford, so universities are another one. But like Y Combinator or other accelerators, the sense of community, and by community I don't mean the US as a big family and big community, but like depending on like where you're coming from, like there's going to be a strong community, within that ecosystem. With a lot of like different pathways also between communities that may not exist in Europe. So, and the result is in the like the stats. Was it like at some point like half of the unicorns were built by a first generation immigrant, something like that?
So maybe there's a sweet spot where you're first generation immigrants, or you're integrated enough to the networks, but you still have the hunger or the chip on your shoulder to prove yourself.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. So talk about going back to France. What are the big things you're going to miss the most about the US, and what are things you're really happy you're leaving behind?
Well, I know I'm going to miss the weather, especially let's talk again in November and December. That's going to be a different one. I'm also trading, life in like, the Bay Area is interesting, right? You have the benefits of a city, yet you almost live in the countryside. Um, we'll be living in an apartment, so it's going to be different. I'm going to miss a lot of friends, for sure. That, funny enough, I was speaking to some where I almost feel like I may see them more often, even though they live here, being in France than in the Bay Area, because I know where they live, so they have to call me when they come to Paris, so I'd be really pissed. But also, I'd be, when I come back to the Bay every quarter or so, I'd be very intentional of seeing them. Whereas, here it was more like, okay, let's work, then let's take care of the family, and there wasn't a lot of social life. I I don't know. I'm sure when I realize I will miss a lot of things, like what is easy here in the US, and I'm sure it's hard in France. What we're gonna get though is um, back to seeing our families. So my wife is she's not French, she's Bulgarian. Her family is between Bulgaria and Germany. All my family is in France. Well, almost all. And we did they they're at best seeing their granddaughter once a year when we go to France, and so we're gonna have, I think, more social richness, and that's candidly like one of the main reasons we're coming back. Our parents are not getting any younger, and we want to get closer to family. We should do another one, like 6 months, 6 months, and after that, and maybe I say, oh shit, I was so wrong. I'm coming back. I'm sorry, sorry.
Well, the first 6 months are the hardest, so give it a year, and maybe
True.
you'll
Yeah, but
adapt. The transition is always difficult. Diving a bit more into what made you choose to move back after 17 years. What was you said family to one degree to be closer, but is there other reasons you decided to end your time here and go back to France?
the honestly, family is like 90% of it. We want. I mean, our daughter also, even though she will say she prefers to stay here, but we want her to have really like exposure to both cultures. And so far, like her exposure has mostly been to the Bay Area. The moment where we had to think about it was a little more than a year ago. Like, so the difference, I guess, between a fund and other types of job is you make a commitment for at least 7 years. The moment you raise a fund, it's like, okay, great. Now I've got like 4 years to invest that fund, and then in like a few years to help the portfolio companies. And we had to raise. Well, we were about to start raising a second U.S. fund, and that's my wife that rightly asked the question like, how long? But that means like we have to sign up for how many more years in the U.S.? Like, well, 7 years. And we did the math. Like 7 years. Our daughter will be 14 and 15. At that point, I mean, there are ways to tell her we're going back to France, but there are only, like, I would say, like painful ways to tell her, like, to tell a teenager, like, to change her roots. Then, so like, oh shit, okay, if we stay, that means, we're staying for good, at least for the next foreseeable, 15 years, up until we retire. And, all right, do we go back to France next year, or do we stay to the US? Maybe not forever, but like for a long, long time more. And we decided to give it a shot back.
No, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
Uh,
You'll still be coming back though, so at
Slowly
least to
coming
visit.
back. And by the way, a lot of friends think that professionally or economically, I'm making a mistake. And in a way, they may be right. Like it's likely that if we put the expectation of the dollars or the euros that I'm going to generate professionally in the next 10 years, the number is higher here than it is in Europe. Uh, One, who the hell knows? And two, even assume that's like a cardinal truth, we're still pretty happy to come back. Like there's the dollar value of a life, and there's also the emotional value of a life.
Yeah, there's a trade-off maybe
Oh,
between
that's a very, very French answer. I'm getting Frencher by the hour.
you're already getting there. You're projecting back already. Yeah, I mean there is a trade-off between life and work and salary, money, and the other things that matter in your life. And maybe you'll make less in France. Maybe you won't, but at least you'll have your connections and your social network and your culture. Um, Is there certain things that you think you're going to bring back to France with you from your experience here that France could use more of in terms of habits or mindsets or way of working?
I think so. Like every problem is an opportunity to find a solution. I'm hoping that I'll keep that mindset. Um, the idea of like giving forward, that like I don't know if my startup will have ever succeeded without the mentors that we had, and the incentive that they had to help us was like very low. Or even like like other entrepreneurs, we pivoted like 4 times at Modewalk. The fourth one came from like writing on a whiteboard with like other founders at StartX, like late at night, like the beers we were drinking were not worth the time that they were spending trying to help me out. So I'm hoping that this is still going to be the case, and also that like those type of values are more imprinted in France.
Well, it's been a long time since you lived there, so things have changed a lot.
And it's way more international also. Like I remember visiting, some startups in Paris where like people are speaking English. That's the official language there. So you see folks from like every countries. It is indeed a different city, I believe. A lot has been done to make it more business minded and more international.
I think a lot of things Macron has done has been to be promoting more business, which have been to some degree good. I know he's not super popular in France, but I do think there's been a lot of, and Paris in particular has done a lot for opening up to business and being more pro business. So hopefully that has some effects that we'll keep seeing, and hopefully you'll be part of growing the startup and VC ecosystem even more once you get back.
Yeah, my job is going to be to invest in actually more in Europe than France specifically. So there's going to be a good bunch of travel. And look, at the end of the day, like for anything ambitious, it takes a village. Wherever you go, there are ambitious people, right? They're in London, they're in Brussels, they're in Berlin. There's like, sure, it won't be the scale of the Bay Area, but like there's a group of like ex-Stanford students in Paris, but like in every city. So you just need to have that mindset, be surrounded with those people more than the naysayers, and then anything is possible again.
And I think there's opportunity with that too, because here there's more of those people, which also means more competition, and it's a little harder maybe to make it through, as opposed to maybe in France or other places. There may be less people that are so ambitious, but if you find them and you go with them, you may have more chance to succeed in a smaller pool, so to speak.
In a smaller pond, yeah.
In a smaller pond,
you're still the same fish, but like the pond is much smaller.
The relative size is what matters. Yeah. So final question before I let you go. So if you were talking to a French person right now who's thinking of coming to the US to either to study like you did at Stanford or to build a company, what's one thing or one piece of advice you would give them so that they're ready for what the reality is like here?
I mean, it's going to be counterintuitive, but it's almost like act first and think later. It's like if you're thinking about coming, just come and give yourself, like the tourist visa is what, like 3 months? Just come for 3 months. I mean, as a student, it may be a different ballgame because like you may not have the means, but like as an entrepreneur, you can build from anywhere. Uh, there's almost like a downside into preparing it too much, because who are you gonna talk to? Like other French people that live in the Bay Area. I've seen some French entrepreneurs that are after a year in the Bay, like I'm gonna sound like a broken record saying that because at Newfund I've heard it so many times, but like they will be able to tell you where the best bakery is, where you can do, like choucroute or whatever, but their English will not have improved because like they will have recreated their like safe environment with other French folks. I think in order to really experience it, like the only way to do that is just like to jump in and give it a shot. And easier said than done when like you're older, you have kids and so forth. But I would say that uh, before that, like yeah, just come in the Bay Area, stay 3 months. Uh, Initially, like my goal was like to come to Stanford, like get the MBA, and then go back to the center of the world that was Paris. And here I am, 17 years later. It took me 17 years to get back to Paris.
I guess it was a good, a good ride and a good time to stay here. And 17 years, maybe you did it all, and maybe who knows, maybe you'll be back. But I do think that's a great piece of advice. I do know like some French people or some other people that have been here for so long, and they still only hang out with French people, and there's little microcosms and bubbles of any culture, and it just seems a bit like a shame you're not like interacting as much with not just Americans but people from everywhere, and you just stay a bit in your comfort zone. And I do think getting out of your comfort zone is kind of what the Bay Area is all about.
Yeah, it's like going to, I don't know, like the Ivory Coast or Ecuador in a Club Med. It's like you haven't been to the Ivory Coast, you've been to a Club Med.
Yeah, yeah, you went to the little vacation for strangers. Oli, thank you so much for taking the time for sharing your experience. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and hope to see you come back here soon.
Pleasure was all mine. See you in 3 months.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Borders and joining us to celebrate the journeys, the successes, and the stories of immigrants making their mark in the US. If this story inspired you, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. You can also find more information at beyondborderspod.com. Your support helps us keep making and sharing these inspiring stories. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, and go beyond borders.